The first time I saw Lieutenant Kira Taves, she was being dragged across the medical bay floor by two of her own squad mates. Blood streaked behind her like some sort of grotesque red carpet. And she was laughing. Actually laughing. I should probably mention that I am Thex 9, combat analyst for the Galactic Coalition's 4th Fleet. My species, the Vorathians, evolved on a high-gravity world where survival meant careful calculation and risk avoidance. We do not laugh when our internal organs are visible. It is simply not done. "Get her on the table," Chief Medical Officer Vorn barked, his 3 arms already reaching for regeneration gel. "What happened?" "Training accident," grunted Corporal Marcus Webb, one of the humans holding her up. He did not sound convinced by his own words. "Training accident," Kira repeated, wincing as they hoisted her onto the surgical platform. "Sure, let's call it that." She coughed, and I noticed with growing horror that one of her ribs was protruding at an angle that defied conventional anatomy. The simulation was supposed to cap at level 7. Someone cranked it to 15. 15. I felt my secondary heart skip a beat. Level 15 combat simulations were reserved for Krogthan shock troopers, beings who stood 3 meters tall and could bench press a small vehicle. Humans were, well, fragile by comparison. Soft. Weak. Everyone knew this. "Who authorized level 15? Vorn demanded, working quickly to seal the worst of the wounds. Kira's eyes, an unsettling shade of green that reminded me of toxic algae, fixed on me. "Hey, analyst, you were monitoring, right?" "Check the logs." I had been monitoring. That was my job, after all. I pulled up the training module records on my datapad, scanning through the authorization codes. My throat sacs contracted when I found the answer. "Captain Rexnor," I said quietly. The room went silent. Even the medical equipment seemed to hum more softly. Captain Rexnor was a Drachnian, one of the Drachnian, Coalition's most decorated warriors. He was also notoriously prejudiced against humans, considering them a liability in combat situations. Soft bodies, slow healing, no natural weapons or armor. The arguments went on and on. "Interesting," Kira said, and that smile crept back onto her bloodied face. "Very interesting." 3 weeks later, she was back in training. The medical staff had predicted 6 weeks minimum recovery time. I had predicted 8. Human resilience was documented, certainly, but there were limits. Broken bones, internal bleeding, muscle tears, these things required time to heal. Kira Taves apparently had not read the manual. She should not be here. I told Commander Yalrix, my direct superior. Her body has not fully recovered. Yalrix, a sensible heptarian with 4 eyes that could assess 16 different data streams simultaneously, nodded. "I agree. But she passed the medical clearance. Barely. The humans have strange definitions of what constitutes healed." We watched through the observation window as Kira ran the obstacle course. Her movements were sharp, economical, no wasted energy. When she hit the climbing wall, she moved like something between a spider and a missile, finding handholds that should not have supported her weight. "Time!" called out the course monitor. 4 minutes, 18 seconds. New human record. I checked my datapad. The previous record had been 4 minutes, 41 seconds, set by a human male who outweighed Kira by at least 30 kilograms. "Impossible," I muttered. "What was that?" Yalrix asked. "Nothing. Statistical anomaly." But it was not nothing. And it was definitely not an anomaly. The real test came 2 months after the incident. The Coalition received a distress call from mining station Taurus 7. Pirates. A small fleet, but well-armed and aggressive. They had already disabled the station's defenses and were demanding the titanium reserves stored in the lower vaults. Our ship, the CSS Valor, was the closest response unit. Captain Rexnor assembled the strike team personally. 20 soldiers, 15 Drachnians, 3 Krogduns, 2 Heptarians. Lieutenant Kira Taves showed up to the briefing anyway. "You were not assigned to this mission," Rexnor growled, his scales rippling with obvious irritation. "Funny thing about that," Kira said, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. "I checked the personnel roster. We are actually short by 3 soldiers. Beta Squad is out with that viral infection from the Kepler station visit. So technically, you need bodies." "Not your body," Rexnor snapped. "You humans break too easily. This is a real combat situation, not a training exercise." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Several of the Drachnian soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Everyone remembered the Level 15 incident. Everyone knew it had been deliberate. "With all respect, sir," Kira said, and there was zero respect in her tone. "I have been cleared for active duty. If you refuse to deploy me without cause, I will file a formal complaint with command. I believe the phrase is discrimination based on species. The Coalition takes that pretty seriously." "Oh, this human was clever." Rexnor's face plates flushed purple, a sign of extreme anger in his species. But she was right. The Coalition's charter was very clear about equal opportunity in combat assignments. "Fine," he hissed, "but you stay in the back. Provide support only. When you get torn apart by pirate weapons fire, I do not want your death on my record." "How thoughtful," Kira replied with that terrifying smile. "I was assigned to monitor the mission from the Valor's tactical center. My role was to track troop movements, analyze enemy patterns, and provide real-time strategic updates. It was a safe position, which suited me perfectly. The strike team deployed via drop pods. Standard insertion. The mining station's docking bays were compromised, so they had to breach through the secondary maintenance airlocks on the station's lower decks. Everything went smoothly for the first 12 minutes. The team moved through the corridors, encountering minimal resistance. The pirates had concentrated their forces near the vault levels, clearly not expecting a military response so quickly. Then, the ambush happened. "Contact! Multiple hostiles! Corridor 7 Beta!" The voice of Sergeant Kryn, one of the Drachnian team leaders, crackled through the comm system. On my display screens, I watched the tactical situation deteriorate rapidly. The pirates had rigged proximity mines throughout the junction points. The explosion caught the front half of the strike team completely off guard. 3 soldiers down immediately. 4 more wounded. "Fall back," Rexnor ordered. "Regroup at checkpoint Alpha." But falling back meant leaving the wounded. The pirates were already moving in to secure their prizes. Standard procedure in pirate tactics. Capture soldiers, use them as bargaining chips. Negative on fallback. Kira's voice cut through the chaos. "I have a shot at their command unit." "Stay in position, Lieutenant," Rexnor roared. "That is an order." What happened next would be analyzed in tactical training courses for years to come. I know this because I personally submitted the footage to 14 different military academies. Kira did not stay in position. She moved forward, using the smoke and debris from the explosion as cover. The station's security cameras tracked her movement, and I watched with growing disbelief as she navigated through what should have been a kill zone. Pirates fired at her. A lot. Plasma bolts scorched the walls around her. One caught her shoulder, spinning her halfway around. She kept moving. "Is she insane?" Yalrix breathed beside me. "Quite possibly," I replied, unable to look away from the screens. She reached a ventilation shaft, one barely large enough for a human to squeeze through. The pirates had not bothered guarding it, because most species in the Coalition could not fit through such a narrow space. Humans, with their flexible skeletons and compressible organs, were different. Kira disappeared into the ventilation system. For 47 seconds, we lost visual contact. When she emerged, she was directly behind the pirate command position. The pirates had set up in what used to be the station's cargo processing center. A dozen of them, heavily armed, coordinating the attack on our soldiers through tactical displays. They never saw her coming. I will spare you the graphic details. Suffice it to say that Kira Taves had brought several weapons with her, but she only needed two, a combat knife and a plasma pistol. What she did with those tools was both horrifying and impressive. The pirate commander, a massive Grellian with natural armor plating, was the last to fall. He managed to get his hands on her, lifting her off the ground with enough force to crush most beings. I heard ribs crack through the audio feed. Kira rammed her knife into the gap between his armor plates. Then she fired her plasma pistol point blank into the wound. When she hit the ground, she stayed down for approximately 8 seconds, long enough that I thought she might actually be finished. Then she stood up, blood running down her armor. 3 confirmed broken ribs, shoulder still smoking from the earlier plasma hit. And that smile. "Command neutralized," she reported. "Hostiles are falling back. Strike team is clear to advance." The rest of the mission was almost anticlimactic. With their leadership eliminated, the pirates scattered. The strike team secured the station within the hour. Total casualties. 3 injured, none fatal. All because one human lieutenant decided that orders were more like suggestions. The after-action debriefing was memorable. Captain Rexnor stood at the front of the room, his faceplate cycling through several shades of purple and orange. Confusion, anger, grudging respect. It was quite the display. "Lieutenant Taves," he began, his voice strained. "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." "You endangered yourself, unnecessarily." "Arguably, sir." "You single-handedly eliminated the pirate command structure and saved this mission from becoming a disaster." "Thank you, sir." Rexnor looked like he was chewing on something extremely bitter. "You are recommended for commendation." Dismissed. As Kira left the room, I noticed she was limping. Badly. The adrenaline from combat had clearly worn off, and her body was reminding her of all the damage she had absorbed. But she was still smiling. "Analyst Thex," Commander Yalrix said softly, "update your assessment of human combat effectiveness." I looked at my datapad. Weeks of research, months of observations, statistical models that all concluded the same thing. Humans were physically inferior, too fragile for frontline combat. "I believe," I said slowly, "that I may need to reconsider several variables." The third incident happened 6 months later. By then, Kira had been promoted to captain. Her exploits at mining station Taurus 7 had made her something of a legend among the coalition forces. Other humans looked up to her. Even some of the other species had started requesting transfers to serve under her command. I had been reassigned as her personal tactical analyst. It was not a punishment, technically, but it certainly felt like one. Analyzing human behavior was exhausting. They did not follow logical patterns. They took risks that should have been fatal. They laughed at danger. We were deployed to Outpost Meridian, a listening station on the edge of Coalition space. Reports had come in of unknown ships passing through the sector. Command wanted eyes on the situation. Simple reconnaissance mission. Low risk. This should have been my first warning sign. Humans and low-risk missions rarely mixed well. The outpost was small. 50 personnel? Basic defenses. Our arrival was meant to bolster security, while the intelligence teams did their work. Captain Taves took command of the military contingent, 20 soldiers from various species. "Perimeter looks solid," reported Lieutenant Webb, Kira's second-in-command. "Sensors are upgraded. Power grid is stable. Nothing to worry about." That night, the sky fell. Not literally, of course, but when the unknown ships decloaked directly above the outpost and began their bombardment, it certainly felt apocalyptic. "Battle stations?" Kira's voice cut through the chaos of alarms and explosions. "All personnel to defensive positions. Analyst Thex, I need threat assessment now." I scrambled to my tactical station, pulling up sensor data with trembling appendages. What I saw made my blood run cold. 5 ships, I reported. Cruiser class. Unknown configuration, but comparable to coalition heavy destroyers. They are targeting our communications array and power generators. Trying to isolate us before the ground assault, Kira muttered. Classic siege tactics. How long until reinforcements arrive? Minimum 6 hours. If they received our distress signal before the communications array was destroyed. So, we are on our own. The first wave of enemy soldiers hit the outpost 17 minutes later. They came from orbital drop pods, punching through the compound's outer defenses like they were made of tissue paper. I caught glimpses of them on the security feeds. Bipedal, heavily armored, armed with weapons that made our standard-issue rifles look like toys. "Return fire!" Lieutenant Webb shouted. "Focus on the landing zones!" But there were too many. For every enemy soldier that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. The defenders were being pushed back, section by section. "Fall back to the Central Command building," Kira ordered. "We will make our stand there." A logical decision. The command building was the most heavily fortified structure in the outpost. Reinforced walls, multiple defensive positions, limited access points. If we were going to hold out for 6 hours, that was our best chance. Except we did not have 6 hours. The enemy brought up heavy weapons, plasma cannons that turned our defensive barriers into molten slag, breaching charges that blew through reinforced doors like they were cardboard. Within 40 minutes, they had pushed us back to the command building's final defensive perimeter. "This is bad," Webb said, which was perhaps the most accurate assessment I had ever heard from a human. We had lost 15 soldiers. The remaining defenders were running low on ammunition. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted, and the enemy was preparing for a final assault. That was when the orbital bombardment began. Not on us, thankfully. The enemy ships targeted the surrounding terrain, reducing everything within a kilometer of the outpost to smoking craters. They were cutting off any chance of escape. This was no longer a siege. It was an extermination. "They really do not want anyone leaving here alive," Kira observed, staring at the tactical display. Her voice was calm. Too calm. I was beginning to understand that this was a warning sign. "Captain," I said carefully, "perhaps we should consider surrender. The coalition has protocols for prisoner exchange." "Do those ships match any known coalition patterns or designs?" I reviewed the sensor data again. "No, they are completely unknown. And have they made any attempt to communicate? Any surrender demands?" "No." "Then, I do not think they are interested in prisoners." The final assault began at dawn. They hit us from 3 directions simultaneously, overwhelming our remaining defenses through sheer numbers. We fell back to the command center's inner sanctum, a reinforced bunker designed to withstand direct orbital strikes. 13 of us made it inside. 13 survivors out of 50. The enemy was cutting through the bunker's doors with plasma, torches. We had maybe 10 minutes before they breached. "It has been an honor serving with you all," Lieutenant Webb said quietly. Everyone nodded. Even I found myself making a gesture of respect. We were going to die here, but we would die fighting. Except Captain Kira Taves was smiling again, and I had learned that smile meant something terrible was about to happen. "Analyst," she said, "how stable is the outpost's fusion reactor?" I felt my throat sacs contract again. "Very stable." "Why?" "And if someone were to manually override the containment protocols? It would explode, obviously. The blast would devastate everything within 3 kilometers. Including those ships in low orbit? Almost certainly. But we are within the blast radius. This is suicide." "It is," she agreed. "For most of us." She pulled up a schematic of the outpost on the tactical display. "But there is an emergency escape tunnel, right here. Leads to a bunker 7 kilometers away. The colonists built it as a fallback position before the military took over the outpost. 7 kilometers underground? Webb asked. How long would it take to reach? At a dead run? 20 minutes. Maybe less. The reactor will explode in less than 15 minutes once the override is initiated, I protested. Basic physics. Kira nodded. Ah, which is why we need a head start. Someone needs to stay behind and hold the door. Give the rest of you time to get clear. The room went silent. Everyone understood what she was suggesting. I will stay, said Corporal Jin, a heptarian who had fought beside Kira since mining station Taurus 7. My species has natural armor. I can hold longer. I appreciate that, Kira said gently. But I need you to lead the others through the tunnel. You know the station layout better than anyone. Captain, you cannot seriously be suggesting that you stay behind alone, Webb said, his voice cracking slightly. I am not suggesting anything, Lieutenant. I am giving orders. You have 60 seconds to start moving, or I will shoot you myself to save the enemy the trouble. She meant it. We all knew she meant it. We ran through those tunnels like death itself was chasing us, which, technically, it was. Behind us, the sounds of combat echoed through the underground passages. Plasma fire, explosions, screaming. Then, silence. She is gone, Webb whispered. She held them off. She is gone. We kept running. We reached the fallback bunker with maybe 3 minutes to spare. Sealed the doors. Huddled together in the darkness. The explosion, when it came, felt like the universe itself was tearing apart. The ground shook. The bunker walls cracked. Emergency lights flickered and died. For several long moments, I genuinely believed we had not made it far enough, that we were about to be vaporized along with everything else. But the bunker held, barely. When the shaking stopped, we waited in darkness. Webb tried the communications. Equipment. Nothing. The blast had probably fried every electronic system for dozens of kilometers. How long until rescue? Someone asked. Unknown, Corporal Jin replied. Could be hours. Could be days. We settled in to wait, mourning the dead, wondering if anyone would ever know what happened here, thinking about the human captain who had sacrificed herself to give us a chance. 6 hours later, we heard sounds above us. Cutting equipment. Rescue teams were digging through the debris. We were saved. The coalition forces had arrived too late to prevent the battle, but they had seen the explosion from orbit. When they scanned the area and detected life signs in the fallback bunker, they mobilized immediately. Lieutenant Webb gave the full report. The attack, the siege, Captain Taves's final stand, and sacrifice. The recording equipment in the bunker had survived, capturing everything. They held a memorial service. 23 names added to the coalition's honor wall. Captain Kira Taves listed among the fallen. Posthumous medals were awarded. Speeches were given. And then, 3 days later, a scout team exploring the blast crater found something impossible. She was lying in the center of the devastation, surrounded by twisted metal and scorched earth. Her armor was gone. Her body was burned. Multiple fractures, radiation exposure. By every logical measure, she should have been dead a dozen times over. But her chest was moving. Shallow breaths, barely perceptible, but breathing. And when they lifted her onto the medical stretcher, when the medics were frantically trying to stabilize her vital signs, when everyone was shouting and running, her eyes opened. Those toxic green eyes, and she smiled. The medical bay on the CSS Valiant looked like something between a research laboratory and a morgue. 17 different specialists from 9 species crowded around the regeneration tank where Captain Kira Taves floated in healing gel. Alive. Impossibly, infuriatingly, completely alive. I stood at the back of the room, datapad clutched in my appendages, trying to make sense of the readings. Trying to find logic in something that defied every biological principle I understood. 70% burns across her body, Dr. Sylph was saying. her tentacles gesturing at the holographic display. Compound fractures in both legs, left arm, 6 ribs, spinal compression, radiation exposure at levels that should have liquefied her internal organs. "So, how is she breathing?" demanded General Torvik, a grizzled Krogthan who commanded the sector defense fleet. Dr. Sylph's tentacles rippled with uncertainty. "We are not entirely sure. Her cellular regeneration rate is approximately 400% above normal human baseline. Her bone density increased during the healing process, and her neural activity suggests she was conscious for at least 20 minutes after the explosion before shock finally shut down her higher brain functions." 20 minutes, I heard myself say. Conscious, in that condition. "The human survival instinct is well documented," Sylph continued, "but this goes beyond anything in the medical literature. She should have died 17 different ways before rescue teams even arrived. But she did not die," General Torvik growled. "She crawled. The blast crater shows drag marks. She crawled almost 200 meters before her body finally gave out." The room fell silent. 200 meters. With a broken spine and radiation poisoning. Because apparently, Kira Taves had decided that dying was optional. I pulled up the crater analysis on my datapad. The scout team had documented everything. The pattern of destruction showed the reactor had detonated while she was still in the command center, right at ground zero. The explosion had punched through 3 levels of reinforced structure and hurled debris into low orbit, and somehow she had survived the initial blast, found herself buried in rubble, dug herself out with broken limbs, and started crawling toward where she thought the rescue teams might search. "Analyst, thanks," General Torvik said, his eyes fixing on me. "You have been studying human combat behavior for over a year now. Explain this." I looked at my datapad. Months of observations, statistical models, behavioral patterns, pages and pages of analysis that suddenly felt completely inadequate. "I cannot," I admitted. "This exceeds all parameters." "Try," Torvik insisted. I took a breath, organizing my thoughts. Human physiology includes several emergency response systems: adrenaline production, pain suppression, elevated strength during crisis situations. But these are temporary measures. They allow humans to survive short-term threats, not sustained catastrophic trauma. "So, what happened here?" "She refused to accept the situation," I said quietly. "On some level, Captain Taves simply decided that dying was not acceptable. And her body, apparently, agreed." Dr. Sylph made a sound that might have been laughter or horror. "That is not how biology works, analyst. It is how human biology works," Lieutenant Webb said from the doorway. I had not noticed him enter. He walked up to the regeneration tank, placing one hand against the transparent surface. "You all keep trying to analyze her like she is some kind of puzzle, but Kira does not follow rules. Never has. That is what makes her dangerous." "Dangerous to the enemy? Or to herself?" General Torvik asked. "Yes," Webb replied. 3 weeks later, Kira was walking again. The medical staff had predicted 3 months minimum before she could leave the tank, 6 months before physical activity, a year before anything approaching combat readiness. She made it to the training facility in 21 days. I found her there at 0400 hours, running combat drills against holographic opponents. Her movements were slower than before, more calculated, but still effective, brutally so. "You should not be here," I said from the observation deck. She paused the simulation, looking up at me with sweat dripping down her face. "Says who?" "Says your entire medical team. Says basic logic. Says anyone with functioning survival instincts." "Well," she said, resuming the simulation and ducking under a holographic blade. "Good thing I left those behind somewhere in that crater." I watched her fight, studied the way she adapted her technique to compensate for lingering injuries. She was not back to full strength. Probably never would be, not completely, but she was still deadly. Why? I asked finally. Why do you keep doing this? You have proven yourself a dozen times over. You could take a command position, training role, strategic planning, anything that does not involve getting yourself killed. Kira ended the simulation and climbed up to the observation deck. She was breathing hard, and I could see the pain in her eyes despite her best efforts to hide it. You want to know the truth? She asked. That would be preferable to more confusion. She smiled. Not the terrifying combat smile, but something softer, more honest. I am terrified, Analyst Thex. Every single mission, every fight. My heart pounds so hard I think it might explode. My hands shake when no one is looking. Sometimes I wake up at night unable to breathe because I am back in that crater, feeling the heat and the pain. This was unexpected. Then why continue? Because being afraid means I am still alive. And as long as I am alive, I can protect people. The soldiers under my command, the civilians we defend, people like you, who analyze things from a distance and try to make sense of the chaos. She looked at the training floor below. Someone has to walk into the fire. Might as well be someone too stubborn to burn. You did burn, I pointed out, extensively. But I am still here. I could not argue with that logic, mainly because it was not logic at all. It was something else. Something my species did not have a word for. 4 months after the incident, Coalition Command deployed us to investigate a derelict ship discovered in the outer reaches. A massive vessel, bigger than anything in the current Coalition fleet. Ancient design, no distress signals, just floating dead in space. I have a bad feeling about this, Webb muttered as our boarding team approached the airlock. You always have a bad feeling, Kira replied, checking her weapon. It is basically your catchphrase at this point. The boarding team consisted of 8 soldiers, 4 humans, 2 Drachnians, 1 Heptarian, and 1 very reluctant Vorathian analyst who had been volunteered for field experience by his commanding officer. Why am I here? I asked for the 17th time. Because you need to see things firsthand, Kira said. You cannot analyze combat from a safe room forever. Sometimes you need to smell the fear. I am smelling it right now, I assured her. My own. The ship's interior was dark. Emergency. Lighting flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows. Our helmet lamps cut through the gloom, revealing corridors that seemed to stretch forever. This place is huge, Webb whispered. What kind of civilization builds something like this? A dead one, Corporal Vex, one of the Drachnians, said. Look at the dust. This ship has been abandoned for centuries. We moved deeper, following what our sensors indicated was the main corridor toward the bridge. Everything was silent except for our breathing and the soft hum of equipment. Then we found the first body. It was humanoid, roughly speaking. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but wrong in ways that made my survival instincts scream. The proportions were off. The skeletal structure visible through desiccated skin showed joints that bent at impossible angles. What is that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Something that used to be alive, Kira said, kneeling beside the corpse. Look at the surrounding damage. Claw marks, plasma, scoring. They fought something here. Fought what? As if answering my question, something moved in the darkness ahead. Fast. Too fast to track with normal vision. Contact, Vex shouted, raising his weapon. But it was already on him. A blur of motion that slammed into the Drachnian soldier and dragged him into the shadows. His screams lasted exactly 4 seconds before cutting off with a wet, final sound. Defensive positions! Kira barked. Back to back! Lights up! We formed a circle, weapons pointing outward, helmet lamps cutting through the dark. For several long moments, nothing happened. Just silence and the pounding of my hearts. Then they came. I cannot adequately describe what attacked us. They moved like liquid shadow, sometimes bipedal, sometimes on all fours, claws that gleamed in our lights, eyes that reflected red, teeth, so many teeth. The fight devolved into chaos. Plasma fire lit up the corridor. Someone was screaming. Might have been me. The creatures were everywhere, moving too fast, attacking from angles that should not have been possible. "Fall back!" Webb yelled. "Back to the airlock!" But the path was blocked. More creatures poured from side corridors, cutting off our escape. We were trapped. 8 soldiers, now 7, surrounded by things that should not exist. Kira stopped retreating. "New plan. We go forward." "Forward?" I squeaked. "Are you malfunctioning?" "The bridge is ahead. Better defensive position. Sealed doors. Move!" So we moved. Through the nightmare. Through the teeth and claws and darkness. 2 more soldiers fell. The Heptarian took a claw to the chest and went down hard. One of the human privates, a young woman named Torres, got separated from the group. Her screams followed us down the corridor. 5 of us made it to the bridge. Kira, Webb, 1 Drachnian, and myself. Plus Corporal Han, a human male who was bleeding from at least a dozen wounds but still moving. The bridge doors were massive, ancient, but the emergency release still worked. We tumbled inside, and Kira slammed the control panel. The doors groaned shut just as the creatures reached us. Something slammed against the metal. Again. Again. The door held, but barely. "Everyone still breathing?" Kira asked. "Define breathing," Han muttered, collapsing against a wall. I was hyperventilating. My species does not handle acute stress well. Webb was trying to stop Han's bleeding. The Drachnian soldier, whose name I never learned, was staring at the door with pure terror in his eyes. "We are going to die here," the Drachnian said flatly. "Just like the original crew." "Not yet," Kira said, moving to the bridge control systems. "These panels still have power. There has to be something we can use." "Like what? A convenient self-destruct button?" "Actually." Kira pulled up a display. Ancient text scrolled across the screen in a language I did not recognize. But the symbols, those were universal. Power flow, reactor control, and yes, emergency destruct protocols. "You cannot be serious," I said. "Again with the exploding? It worked last time. You nearly died last time." "Nearly," she agreed, her fingers dancing across the controls. "But I got better. Look, this ship has been dead for centuries, but the reactor is still active. Barely, but active. I can overload it, take out these things. And us, if we do not get off this bridge in the next 10 minutes? "How do we get off the bridge?" Webb asked. "The door is surrounded by those creatures." Kira pointed at a display showing the ship's layout. "There. Emergency escape pods, 3 decks down. We go through the maintenance shafts." "Those shafts are maybe half a meter wide," the Drachnian protested. "Then we better breathe in." The maintenance shafts were, if possible, worse than the corridors. Tight, dark, the sounds of creatures hunting us echoed through the metal tubes. We crawled, squeezed. Han left a trail of blood behind us. I left a trail of dignity. We made it 2 decks before they found us. A creature pulled itself into the shaft behind us, moving like a serpent. Fast. So terrifyingly fast. The Drachnian soldier was last in line. He saw it coming, made a decision. "Go," he said simply. Then he turned and opened fire, blocking the shaft with his body. His sacrifice bought us maybe 30 seconds, long enough to reach the escape pod bay, long enough to get Han and myself into a pod, long enough for Kira and Webb to seal the hatch. "Launch!" Kira shouted, slamming the emergency release. The pod shot out of the derelict ship like a missile. Through the viewport, I watched the ancient vessel recede. watched as lights began flickering throughout its structure. The reactor going critical. Did we make it far enough? Webb asked, breathing hard. Probably not, Kira admitted. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. The derelict ship came apart in an expanding sphere of fire and debris. Our pod tumbled through space, alarms screaming, hull integrity failing. We crashed into the CSS Valiant's emergency bay, going approximately twice the recommended speed. The pod crumpled like paper. Emergency crews swarmed around us. Someone was pulling me from the wreckage. Someone else was shouting medical terminology I did not understand. I woke up 3 days later in the medical bay. Lieutenant Webb was in the bed next to me, wrapped in enough bandages to supply a small hospital. Corporal Han was in a regeneration tank, but alive. And Kira Taves was standing at the window, looking out at the stars, with new burns on her arms and a fresh cast on her left hand. You know, I said hoarsely, there are safer career paths available. She turned and smiled. That smile. Where is the fun in that? Fun. You consider this fun. I consider this living, analyst. There is a difference. I thought about that. About all the data I had collected, all the analysis, all the attempts to understand human combat effectiveness through statistics and observation. I need to revise my report, I said finally. Oh? What are you going to tell them? The truth. That humans are not stronger than other species. Not faster. Not more durable. But you are all absolutely, completely, certifiably insane. And that makes you the most dangerous beings in the coalition. Kira laughed. Actually laughed, despite what must have been considerable pain. Best combat analysis I have ever heard. 6 months later, I was promoted. Apparently, my field reports were considered extremely valuable. They assigned me to a new position, personal analyst to the newly formed Human Special Operations Division. My first day, I walked into the briefing room to find 37 humans. All of them had that look. That dangerous, slightly unhinged, absolutely terrifying look that said they had walked through fire and decided they liked the warmth. Captain Kira Taves stood at the front of the room, scarred, battered, unbroken. Welcome to the team, Analyst Thex, she said. Try to keep up. I looked at my data pad, looked at the room full of humans who had all survived impossible odds, looked at Kira with her toxic green eyes and that terrible smile. I am going to need a bigger data pad, I muttered, and so began the most terrifying, exhausting, and somehow rewarding assignment of my career. Because humans, I learned, are not just survivors. They are hope wrapped in stubborn flesh. They are laughter in the face of death. They are the species that crawls out of craters with a smile and asks what comes next. They called her too weak for battle. They were wrong. All of them. Because strength is not about how much you can lift or how hard you can hit. Strength is about getting back up when any sane being would stay down. Strength is smiling at death and saying, not today. And if that is what humanity brings to the coalition, then the universe better be ready. Because these fragile, illogical, absolutely magnificent beings are just getting started. I closed my datapad and looked at Captain Taves. What is our first mission? Her smile widened. Something dangerous. Of course it is. Something that will probably get us all killed. Naturally. Something that no rational being would ever volunteer for. I assumed as much. She laughed and clapped me on the shoulder, nearly knocking me over. You are learning, analyst. Welcome to humanity. And despite everything, despite my better judgment and survival instincts, I found myself smiling back. Because maybe, just maybe, some of that human insanity was contagious. I certainly hoped so. We were going to need it.